Thanks, Mariam. All right. Cool. So now let's talk about acquisition. Okay, so going back to the user journey, we're gonna now look at the first step, really, just the sign up phase and everything that happens prior to that. So is it getting users to sign up? Um, okay, now if we go back to the use case map, so like I told you guys, use case map is the foundation. A lot of the things you're going to be doing in both acquisition and retention are stemming from the use case map, or at least guided by the use case map. So if you look at, for example, things like the problem, the alternatives, and the why, a lot of your messaging, so your messaging strategy across the board, whether it's on websites, on an ad, an outbound message, in a social media post, whatever it is all guided by these three variables when you think about it. So this is kind of your message strategy coming from there. And if you look at your targeting, again, you're targeting any acquisition channel is going to be stemming from the ICP and how you define and detail the ICP. All right. Now, one thing, just a general rule, and you might have seen this, and you might have seen this using slightly different numbers. So sometimes it's 95-5 rule, sometimes it's 90-10 rule, sometimes it's 85-15, whatever it is. But the concept in general is the idea that the vast majority of your users out there, of your population, are what's called out market buyers, meaning that they don't necessarily have an immediate need for your product right now. Okay? So they would have a need at some point in the future, but the vast majority is not a pressing immediate need. Really, a very small portion, 5-10% of of these users are in-market buyers. So when you're thinking about your acquisition activities, number one, and I've seen a lot of companies do that, is you should not only go after the 5%, right? That's one. Secondly, you need to understand which activities are catered for for the spectrum, right? So you have the spectrum of users in terms of intent and willingness for them to actually use your product or buy. You need to kind of have activities that cater for different users across the spectrum. Okay. So if we look at examples of some of these activities and what they would look like, you have your linear activities, right? So things like paid media, things like outbound, things like partnerships, maybe something like ASO or app store optimization. These kinds of activities, they can serve in-market buyers. Now, this doesn't mean that these activities cannot serve out-market buyers or cannot have, for example, brand impact. Of course, they can. But what I'm saying is that they are more suited to that, right? So if you're looking at reaching the 5% of in-market buyers, these are the kinds of activities that you could be looking at. Again, something like SEO can serve also bottom funnel. Um, Someone who is in market might also be exposed to your, let's say, SEO article page and end up going there. But this is just kind of give you an idea that activities can serve different parts of the spectrum. You have other types of activities like compound activities. So these are things like your growth loops and your SEO bottom of funnel that can cater for that middle part of the spectrum, right? And then you have other activities, which you could call them brand activities. These are purely serving the out market buyers, right? So that would be things like social content, top of funnel SEO, and maybe PR activities, personal branding on LinkedIn. Let's say if you're a founder doing founder led activity, these are all brand activities. Now, the thing is, a lot of companies, what they do is they go after the 5% of in-market buyers, and they ignore the bigger chunk of their out-market buyer users. You absolutely want to balance your acquisition activities between both. You want to have a balance of brand activities, compound activities, and linear, and not only go after in-market because, like I said, the vast majority of users are out market. Okay. The other thing also keep in mind here is that when you run these activities, let's say you're running a brand activity, you should not expect a brand activity to give you the results of a linear activity, right? So if you're doing a brand campaign, whatever the channel may be, you cannot have the same expectations of that campaign as you are with a linear activity or one of these compound activities, right? So each one kind of you want to have different metrics, but also different expectations. Like what is that campaign serving on on that spectrum. Okay. All right. Another thing that ties into your acquisition and your basically how what channels you would go after, what channels you would what acquisition channels you would work with is your monetization model. Okay, so that's again one of the factors, not the only one. But you'll see you can again look at this in terms of a spectrum. So on the left side, on the far left, you have companies with low model friction. And when I say low model friction, meaning that for the user to experience the product and the value of the product, there is minimal friction, right? And so for these types of companies, you're looking at things like Facebook or WhatsApp or Belong. So these are all kind of like social network type of companies. And you'll see that these companies cannot tolerate a high CAC. So they are in a position where they can only really work with low CAC, or they can only really tolerate low CAC. So the kinds of activities, acquisition activities that they would rely on mainly would be things like viral B2C SEO, for example. Okay, so word of mouth or viral or B2C or SEO, things like that. Right? So things that wouldn't have high CAC. As you start moving to the right of the spectrum, so the model friction starts to go slightly higher up. Then they can also start tolerating or uh, being able to have slightly higher CAC, right? So then they can start doing things like running ads, right? So they can then a company like Dollar Shave Club or Washman, where let's say you have a subscription every month that you pay. It's not a huge subscription, it's a relatively small subscription, but it allows this company to then start investing in other acquisition channels that would have slightly higher CAC. As you move further to the right, again, higher friction. So let's say companies like HubSpot or Gameball, these are companies that require a subscription, but it's higher. So you're looking at, let's say, $100 to $700 a month, let's say. So these guys then can have things like inside sales, invest in B2B content. They can afford slightly higher CAC. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, you have companies like Palantir. So these are enterprise sales, very high model friction. A company might take months to for a deal to materialize. So these companies can afford having high CAC. So just keep that in mind also that when you're deciding on what channels to work with, what acquisition channels to work with, keep in mind where you sit uh, on that spectrum. Another thing to keep in mind also is the idea that you will eventually um, need to consider expanding your
Just
channels.
a just
Yep.
a question on enterprise acquisition. So this
Yep.
is typically by salespeople, or
Not
you
necessarily,
would
no. So yeah, no, you can definitely have other channels. You can even do product-led self-serve motion for enterprise accounts, right? So this is not necessarily to say that this is the only channel that you should use for that case. But it's kind of just giving an example of that you would basically you're willing to invest more in other forms of acquisition because you can afford higher CAC because you make a lot more money when you close a deal. All right, so going back over here, yeah. So one thing to keep in mind again is that at some point when you're running an acquisition channel for a period of time, you will start seeing diminishing returns from that channel. And the sources or the reasons for diminishing returns is that when you're running a channel, and let's say you're running that channel for a small percentage of your users, let's say you're in-market buyers, as you start expanding to users that are out-market, naturally the performance of out-market is not going to be the same as in-market, right? So with in-market, you have less friction. They have more intent in using your product. So you would expect higher conversion rates. You would expect lower cost per conversions, for example. But as you start expanding your audience, you start going to users that don't have an immediate need for your product right now. So naturally, you would start seeing lower conversion rates and higher cost per conversion. So just keep in mind that at some point you're going to have to try different channels, right? You cannot just stick to one channel and continue running with that. The other thing also is marketplace dynamics. For example, when you're running ads, the cost of these ads is going to go up naturally because more advertisers are coming in, there's more competition. For example, that's one market dynamic that will force you to not only rely on that one channel forever, right? Or maybe market dynamics, like for example, in the case of SEO, let's say search engines decide to change their algorithm and that affects you in some way. Uh, so just keep that in mind, that diminishing returns is a fact and it's something that you will have to deal with at some point in the future. Now, I wanted to just talk a little bit about channel expansion in general and some of the mistakes the companies do when they decide to expand to other channels in their acquisition. So one mistake is, like I said, over-reliance on known channels. So, for example, running Google Ads only forever and just relying purely on that without testing other channels. Or maybe another mistake is that you get pushed into new shiny channels, like new trendy channels, right? So let's say produce content with AI, and you just go ahead and produce content with AI just because everyone's talking about it, without factoring in the potential consequences of that, or maybe if it's not the right thing that you should be doing. So just generally getting kind of peer pressure from the market. And finally, failing to set up effective tests that are necessary to scale. So a lot of cases, what happens is you try out a new acquisition channel, and then basically come to a conclusion or a decision prematurely, right? So you decide to cancel that channel after running, let's say, a very low volume test for, let's say, 2 weeks, and you haven't reached significant data to come to a conclusion, for example. That's one of the main reasons also for, or one of the biggest mistakes when doing channel expansion is not running experiments properly. All right. So speaking of experiments, let's talk a little bit about how to do experiments in the context of acquisition. Now, experiments is something that you might have seen more of um, in the context of, let's say, optimizing your product, right? So let's say running A/B tests on your product or whatever form of experiments to optimize, let's say, your onboarding or to optimize whatever it may be. But you also want to bring that mindset of experimentation um, in the context of acquisition. Okay, so let's look at the steps or basically how you would go about this. Let's take an example. Okay, so let's see here. What we're doing now is that we're designing an acquisition experiment. So let's say we are a fitness app, and the goal here, what we're trying to achieve basically with the experiment is to generate 50 signups on our fitness app within 30 days. So that's the goal, clear, straightforward. Now, in order to reach this goal, there are a few inputs or variables that you want to also articulate here. One is the hypothesis. So your hypothesis from this experiment is that what exactly do you believe will achieve the goal? So let's say we believe that partnering with micro-influencers will drive 50 signups in 4 weeks. So that's the initial hypothesis of the experiment. The next thing you want to do is you want to define the audience. So who exactly is the target audience for the experiment? So let's say millennials who follow fitness influencers and live in urban areas. Next, you want to define the channels. We're going to do this on Instagram and TikTok, partnering with micro-influencers on both platforms who promote home workouts. Okay. The details of the experiment is that we will run a series of Instagram posts and stories promoting our fitness app through 5 micro-influencers with under 100K followers, offering an exclusive promo code to track conversions. Okay, this is just the details of the experiment. Your metrics or the KPIs that you're gonna be tracking would be things like we'll track the number of signups using the promo code of influencers from their posts, the engagement rate on posts, and cost per acquisition. And finally, the timeline, we will run this experiment for 30 days. Okay, so these are all the components of an experiment. And you get to this point and you're basically ready to launch this experiment. Now, the idea here, and actually, before I do that, I want to show you guys real quick an experiment in the context of B2B. So this was a fitness app. Now let's look at B2B. Let's say your goal here is to generate 10 demos for our marketing software within 60 days. Okay, so that's our goal. So the hypothesis is the following, that we believe that running signal-based outbound will help us book, let's say, 10 demos during that period. That's the hypothesis. The audience here is marketing directors of small to medium-sized e-commerce businesses in GCC. The channels we're going to be using LinkedIn and email to run automated outreach campaigns on both channels. The details that we will target prospects who've recently started a new role, and also we will we'll target website visitors. So de-anonymize website visitors and reach out to them on both LinkedIn and email, using tools like Clay or Trigify or RB2B and these guys. The metrics here is that we will track the positive reply rate and demos booked. And finally, the timeline is 60 days. Okay, so again, just an example here for both B2C and B2B. The point is that you want to get in a habit of running these experiments continuously back to back, right? Because what happens in most cases, especially with acquisition, is that you launch a campaign, an open-ended campaign, with no clear time frame for the campaign, right? And you continue running that campaign with the hope of generating results eventually. Now, one thing to keep in mind is depending on the nature of the channel also, like some channels require some longer time for an experiment to materialize or for an experiment to actually see the fruits of that experiment. But just keep in mind that regardless of what the time frame is, you need to have a structure for an experiment, and with basically following these different components, because that's really the only way for you to test and learn as quickly as possible, right? It forces you to give a structure to whatever the activity may be, and test it. And if it works, it works. You scale it. If it doesn't, you move on to another experiment, right? But it's an easy way for you it's an easy hack to test and learn as quickly as possible. All right. Now, your turn. I'd like you guys to design an experiment using the variables that we've laid out. So number one, what is the goal? What is the hypothesis? Who is the audience? What channels? What are the details of the experiment, the metrics, and the timeline?
You mean experiment for our products? Yes.
For acquiring new users.
Okay. For our products.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Who would like to present? Or I'll just pick randomly. We'll go back to our school days. Okay. Go for it. Okay, so I think we're...
It's Aidana.
Oh, there we go.
So goal was already set by the by the example itself, acquire new users. So we're B2B.
So, sorry,
Uh,
one thing on this point, just in the goal, just to be a bit more clear on what you're trying to, basically what the goal is. So you want to probably input numbers in the goal. So let's say I want to
okay.
acquire X number of users within a period of time. Yeah.
Okay, so for this specific experiment, like signing even one hotel will be good, um,
Yeah. So
good
even in
something. Mm-hmm.
so even in that case, you can just say acquire one hotel
Okay,
within let's say a period of time. Yeah. Go on.
okay. Acquire one hotel within 1.5 months through sales agency. So we how do we usually sell? It's through our network or existing clients or going directly. And making it through the agency, it's kind of like an alternative to hiring a sales agent into the team, sales manager. But it's kind of like they have expertise in it. They already know what is ICP and how to speak to the client and what is the ethics of talking to the client. So we actually are doing it right now. Um, I gave my LinkedIn account and they keep sending invitations to hotel managers.
Mhm.
And the main thing is we got into the call and got our ICP done. Like we only want like the owners or top managers, like general manager of the hotel or hotel chain or someone with innovation within the hotel chain. But it should be top
Mhm.
management, not
Mhm.
head of something. It should be general manager or something.
Mhm.
Channels is LinkedIn, and we are giving them 1.5 months. And our expectations from them, it's at least like 10 calls with top management. And we expect from 10 calls, maybe 2 contracts signed. And
Mhm.
we'll see if this works or not. If yes, we will
Okay.
keep doing it.
Got it. Got it. Great. And they are also responsible for not only generating the lead, but also booking the call, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Their main thing is they will book the call through my Calendly with a
Yeah.
hotel
Got it.
representative, and but the call will be lead by me.
Yeah, yeah. Got you. And are they also responsible for closing the deal? So from the point of after the call is done to closing the deal, they're also responsible for that part?
No, no, they're
Okay.
not responsible for that part.
Got it. So I think in that case, just to be also fair to the experiment and to whoever is running the experiment, maybe in the goal, you can say that the goal is instead of closing a deal with one hotel within a month and a half, you can say that the goal is to generate, let's say, 10 calls or 20
Okay,
calls or 30 calls.
okay.
So then they would be judged on that. Because you wanted to validate whether that function of working with them, you want to scale it or not.
But they
So maybe
do,
you can.
but they do have like um whether we will work with them further or not will be depending on number of calls that they like qualitative calls that
Yeah.
they gave us, but
Yeah.
they also have fee on if we will sign with the hotel, they have additional fee that they will get if we will sign with them. So they are interested in signing
Got it.
with us as well.
Got you. Got you. Cool. Thanks, Aidan, for that. All right. Thanks, guys, for all the input. We're gonna have to move on, but I really appreciate all the input, though. This is great. I gotta say, this is probably one of the highest levels of participation in all the previous Taqadam batches. So awesome job, guys. All right. Um, yes. All right, so let's move on to acquisition loops. Okay, so we touched on that, kind of like just the general concept of the idea is that you have 3 steps. The loop consists of 3 steps. So a user joins, and this user takes a series of actions. These actions generate an output, and this output gets reinvested as the input of a new loop. Okay. All right. So there are three types of acquisition loops. You have viral loops, content loops, and paid loops. All right. So each one of these types has drivers for the type. Okay. So you have within viral loops, you have a, a viral loop with a personal utility. You have a viral loop with a financial utility, and a viral loop with a social utility. I'm going to explain each one of these and give you an example also to understand. So, and moving on to content loops. Content loops, you have two drivers. You have or let's say two types. You have a user-generated content loop, and you have a company-generated content loop. And within paid loops, you have two. You have online ads, so that's straightforward ads, running ads, and the other would be sales staff. Okay, so let's take each one of these and really understand what we're talking about. Let's first look at the first set, which is viral loops, personal, financial, and social. Okay, so starting with the first one. So now we're looking at a viral loop with a personal utility. So before we go into the steps of the loop, just to explain it in very simple terms, this is a loop that is based around the idea that when a user comes to your product and uses your product, this user is going to invite or is going to refer your product to someone else, because when they do that, they get more value from the product. So the product becomes more valuable to them when they invite someone else or when they refer the product to someone else. Okay. You might have come across this concept of network effects. And network effects is essentially the idea of a viral loop with a personal utility. And this is remember when I was talking about Zoom earlier, and I said that Zoom is a privileged product because they have network effects built into the product. Like the nature of the product requires the user to invite others, right? And this is obviously a very powerful thing, and not all products have that, right? So it's something that some products just by nature have that. Zoom was one example, because for you as a product, as a user, you have to invite others to get more value from them. It's not that you have to, but you would want to do that because then you would get more value from the product. In this case, it's Belong, and Belong is an app. It's actually a startup out of the UAE, and basically it's a local community type of app. So you can use the app to connect with people that share similar interests in your country or city. So the idea here is that when a user signs up on Belong, this user is prompted to invite their friends and family. And so the percentage of these invitees will then convert to new signups, and then they would do the same thing. Now, why would I invite others? Because Belong becomes more valuable to me. I get more value from Belong when more of my connections and friends use it. So social networks, all social networks of different types of social networks, they all have that built in. This type of loop can apply to them. Any collaboration tool would have that also built in. So for example, Slack, Miro, Notion, all of these are products that can have this type of loop, a viral loop with a personal utility. All right, let's move on to the second type. So here we're looking at um, what is okay? So a viral loop with a financial utility. So in plain English, the idea here is that for me as a user, when I sign up on the product, I would be I would want to invite others or refer others because I would get financial gain from doing that. So this is very straightforward. One of the most popular examples of that is Dropbox. So Dropbox, one of their biggest growth levers, one of the things that made them explode back in the day when they first launched, is the idea that when I invite someone else and that other person signs up on Dropbox, I get extra storage. All right, so what I'm doing now is that I'm getting financial gain because I'm getting more for the same amount that I'm paying. So that's a viral loop with a financial utility. So in this case, if we look at Rent Cara, so a new user signs up, the user is presented with an option to refer Cara to other businesses where they also get lower rental prices. So here we're renting company equipment. So when I refer to another business, another SMB, I get, let's say, lower enterprise. Just as an example, again, these are all hypotheticals. So the output here is the percentage of the referrals convert to new signups, and then they would do the same thing. Okay. Now keep in mind when you're running these loops, is that it's not just that you're drafting them on a paper, but every single one of these steps requires optimizations and tweaks. So for example, let's say in the case of here at Gara, when a user signs up, you're going to have to optimize the experience inside the product and maybe through emails and through other forms of engagement to prompt the user to refer, right? So basically you want to increase the percentage of users that refer from the users that signed up. So in order to do that, there's a lot of optimization to go into that step alone. And then when the referral is sent out to the connection to the other business, there's a whole other set of optimizations on how to get that other user to actually sign up, right? So this loop is not something that you just draft on a paper. There's a lot of work that goes into optimizing the loop and helping that loop spin faster. Okay. All right, let's look at the third type of loops. So now still within viral loops, but now we're looking at social utility. All right, so let's take Uktub as an example. So Uktub allows businesses to create autonomous AI agents or teammates. So in plain English, the idea of a social utility, a viral loop with a social utility, is that when I sign up on the product, I would be willing to share the product with my connections because it gives me social status. All right, it gives me some form of social recognition. So a viral loop with a social utility, it has to do with basically robbing one's, not necessarily robbing one's ego, but can basically someone would want to brag about your product because it's an innovative product, it's a great find, whatever the reason may be for that, but the utility here is social. So let's say a user signs up. The user is presented with an option to share the work of their new autonomous AI teammates, for example. A percentage of their connections would then convert to new users. Okay, so that's the social utility. Now, the thing to keep in mind, guys, with viral loops especially, right? So you have financial and social utilities, and you have personal utilities. You want to try and understand what is the thing that drives your users, because when you decide to, let's say, run a social utility or a financial utility, there needs to be some research done before that to understand that a user, when they come to my product, they would be willing to brag about it. Or when someone comes to my product, they would be willing to share it to get some financial gain, right? So whatever the viral loop may be, just try and understand what is the thing that drives your users the most out of these loops. And of course, you can run experiments around these loops. Okay, so now we are done with the first set, viral loops, personal, financial, social. Let's move on to content loops. So now we're looking at two drivers, user-generated and company-generated. So let's take FIFA Plus as an example here. A new user signs up, a new seller signs up. The seller creates a listing that gets indexed on Google. A percentage of searchers who see the listing join as new sellers on FIFA Plus. Okay, this is a very straightforward classifieds type of loop. Companies like Dubizzle would have that kind of loop, and it's centered around the content that users are generating. But again, FIFA Plus as a team or as a company, they would have to optimize these listings, and so really this is an SEO play pretty much to get better rankings and get more traffic from these user-generated pages. The second type would be a company-generated loop. So Airmo in this case, a new customer generates revenue for the company. That's the first step. Before I go to the steps, the simple premise here is that when you generate revenue from customers, you are reinvesting that revenue into generating content, right? So that content would then get indexed on Google, brings you more traffic, potentially more signups, potentially more revenue. You reinvest that revenue into generating more content. So that's kind of like this loop especially is a bit of a wide loop because of course you're factoring in the sales cycle and the revenue generation and the indexation of these pages on Google and the traffic coming. So it's a bit of a wide loop. but it's one of the loops that a lot of companies have used successfully, like HubSpot, for example. HubSpot is one of the biggest growth levers is reinvesting a lot of the revenue into generating content. All right, so here a new customer generates revenue in the company. Revenue is reinvested in producing content. This new content gets indexed on Google, generating leads and customers for the company. And again, the loop spins. The third set is paid loops. All right, so here we're looking at ads and sales staff. So very straightforward. Let's take Sampo AI. So a new customer signs up on Sampo AI. The revenue from this customer is reinvested into running more ads. So it's similar to the previous one where you're reinvesting into content. Here you're reinvesting revenue into ads. And then, of course, these ads will bring you traffic, closing deals, reinvest the revenue into ads. And finally, we have Revly. So in the case of a viral loop, a paid loop for a sales team. So a deal is closed and revenue is generated. The company reinvests this revenue into hiring more sales reps. These more sales reps would then close more deals, etc., etc. Right. Okay, so if we look at these different loops, because then you ask the question of what loop should I deploy here or work on? A few things to note. Viral loops and content loops, you can consider these as primary loops and paid loops as a secondary loop. So you probably don't want to only have a paid loop as the only growth loop that you're relying on, because paid loops are capital intensive, right? These are costly loops, all right? So ideally for your product, you want to have at least one primary loop from either viral or content. And of course, viral loops are the ones that, I mean, when you're looking at the fastest growing companies, typically they would have one viral loop in most cases. But content loop are also very powerful. But the idea here is that you don't want to only rely on secondary loop like a paid loop. Okay? The other thing to keep in mind is that each one of these types of loops, so the three sets of loops, they have different constraints. So with viral loops, the primary constraint here is that you need a lot of users. So the number of users flowing through the loop is the biggest constraint. If you have very, very few users, that's not going to help the loop in spinning fast, right? So the main constraint here is you want to get a lot of users to funnel through these loops. If you look at content loops, the primary constraint here is the amount of content flowing through the loop, right? So whether it's user generated or company generated, you need a lot of content produced in order for the loops to spin faster and produce better results. And then finally, for paid loops, the primary constraint is the amount of capital, right? How much revenue are you able to reinvest into these channels, whether it's paid ads or hiring more salespeople? And that's why really the hardest, or maybe the one with the most friction is paid loops. And that's why we keep it as a secondary type of loop. All right. Now your turn, guys. This is the last exercise. And then gonna get a break from Slido for a couple of days, and then again after tomorrow. All right. So for this exercise, I want you guys to come up with one acquisition loop. Choose from either viral or content. So let's keep paid loops aside. Let's look at just pick one loop, whether it's viral, whether it's personal, financial, or social, or a content loop, whether it's user generated or company generated. Just keep in mind, guys, for the loop, you're defining 3 steps, right? So the input, the actions or the steps, and the output.
Can you please switch to the slide that was previously like with the steps?
Yeah, I'm gonna switch back, and then I'll you guys can take a screenshot and then I'll move back here because when I change the slide, you're gonna be able to answer on Slido. So I'm just gonna go over here. That's going to erase whatever you guys have written on Slido. Yeah, so just to let you know. Okay, so you can. Which one you wanted to screenshot? This or the very first one that just explains the loop? This one. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Cool. All right. Let's go back here. All right. All right. Who would like to present? Marina, you want to go for it?
Yeah, okay. I just started to think how to make it more interesting, like from a viral point of view. So actually, like all this sustainability is pretty good for PR. And just if to make a statement, maybe in the contract itself. So if we'll get good results with this reducing of methane emission, let's do a joint press release, and it's like good for both parties, and like a referral. So yeah.
Got you. All right, great. So then a user signs up. So that would be the input, the first step. The steps, or let's say the actions, is that after they get to the point where they've reduced their methane emissions, they are prompted to share that, whether them sharing it on socials or them being featured in a kind of like a press release, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Got it. And then that would bring referrals potentially through either social, their connections, or that press release being also potentially indexed on Google. So that can actually be a joint can be a social slash content company generated content loop. So kind of like two in one in a way. Great. Thanks.
And also
Thanks,
financial,
Mary.
because one month of, or I don't know, like how many I need to calculate this. It also can be useful for some small companies at least.
Okay. Got it. Thanks, Marina. Right. Who else? Let's take one more and then we wrap it up. Who would like to present? Rebecca, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, can do. So a new user would sign up to use the software, encourage another user to sign up, which would mean that the software, and with the software, it's got different modules, which if they got another user to sign up, they'd get access to one of these other modules to do different processing or additional storage.
Okay, got it. So that's a viral loop with a financial utility, correct?
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so you wanna think of the driver, because then for the loop to spin, and one of the things that's gonna help the loop spin faster is basically deciding on a loop that taps into what drives that user to do the share in the first place, or the referral. So in this case, I think it would fall under financial because they would get more modules, they would access to more modules in the product at the same price, correct? If they share and those connections. Yep. Got it. Cool. Thanks, Rebecca. All right. Thanks everyone for all your input. So just one last thing on acquisition. So what you want to end up with is really this picture here. Like I said again, the growth model, but only covering the up to the acquisition part. So you have your linear channels, and those are feeding into your acquisition loops. And again, you can start with one loop, optimize it, and then see if you can add another one. One thing to keep in mind also is that these loops, they take time to materialize. And so to actually start seeing the results and the fruits of these loops, you need to give it a few months. In some cases, some loops can actually require more than a year. But the thing is, when you have these loops in place and it's optimized and it's spinning properly, this is really the thing that accelerates your growth. The fastest growing companies really are the ones that have been successful at deploying these loops. All right. We come to the end of the session, guys. So we probably have 3 more minutes maybe for questions, but also we have another session after tomorrow. And after tomorrow, we're going to be looking at retention and some concepts around product-led growth. Any final questions?
I have a question on, do you know of a good case study benchmark for enterprise sales companies in the region where there is any public data on CAC cost, LTV, just kind of from a benchmarking perspective that you could look at?
I'll tell you what, maybe drop me an email on
Okay.
this, and let's take it offline.
Sure.
Any final questions?
Any final questions from anyone? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask Tarek directly. Another way, Tarek is also on our mentors page with his Calendly link. So anytime you want to book with him a one-on-one, please feel free to do so. His calendar is available until Feb. So utilize that time, utilize Tarek's time as well, very well, because you might not be able to find him post the program. So please book with him, utilize him. He's very supportive and can add a lot of, you could say, growth to your startup. Thank you very much for your time, Tarek. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Look
Same
forward
to you
to
guys.
seeing everyone on Wednesday. Please, let's be here on time. Cameras open and excited and energetic. Hope everyone has a great rest of your evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.